morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today on the Roundup, we're going to be answering 3 of the important questions we've been hearing from international educators over the past week. It's been an interesting ride this first fall term of 2020 after enduring a very up and down spring term in terms of activity on campus and student recruitment events being impacted. We're going to be talking about a lot of those impacts today, but before we get started, special shout out to those of you watching live here on Facebook. It's always great to have you a part of the discussion here and to get your thoughts on the different issues that we're grappling with today and some of the suggestions that we're making. Especially important also to recognize those of you who are watching on repeat, either on the Facebook channel or our YouTube channel, as well as those that are listening to the Midweek Roundup part of your podcast week. It's always good to be coming to you and sharing our thoughts on what are some of the key issues in our field today. And we're switching back to our old school map today with some thoughts to the future and charting some new courses. And these maps are going to be helpful to us as we get to where we need to be in 2021. So let's get started right away. For those who are new to the Roundup, we take these 3 questions that we address each week from the news stories that we've been seeing pop up over the last few days. We do put out a newsletter on Monday mornings called All the SMIE News Fit to Share, and that stands for Social Media and International Ed News. And we have about 4 or 5 social media stories and anywhere from 20 to 30 international ed stories, and oftentimes where those 2 areas overlap. And today we'll be covering in depth 3 of the themes that we saw coming out of those news stories last week, and kind of giving you our next level thoughts on what how these might impact what we do in our day-to-day in international ed. So let's get started with the first question. Will lessons be learned from the fall in spring? Now, here we're talking mostly about how international students are on campus right now, how they're studying their situations, learning environments, all of those things, and also the broader picture in the United States on how campuses who have made the decision early to be in person and committed to that with in-person and hybrid courses offered in the fall, to those who went entirely online, and how the demographics might be shifting come the spring term, and will those lessons have been learned in either direction or both directions, so to speak. So let's get right into it. And this first, as it relates specifically to international students, the biggest unknown for international student services folks on campus, the advisors who are meeting with students day to day, who are trying to get them registered for the spring term, is the impact of current immigration regulations and the exemption as it's been in place since March that has allowed students to be online or doing hybrid courses beyond the 1 per term that is typically allowed by immigration regulations. Those regulations were extended or the amendment or the exemption that was made in the spring was continued through the summer and the fall term, and many international student advisors were quite unsure as to whether that advice would be continued over through the spring term. So we're wondering how long that will continue, and the longer the pandemic drags on, obviously the need, I think immigration folks in DC at DHS realize that clearly the pandemic isn't over as much as they thought it was in the summer when they introduced can't be online or hybrid for fall for returning students. So that's clearly the pandemic's lingering effects, not only in the United States but globally, have impacted immigration policy. And the allowances that we have here in the U.S. for continuing students to take online, to take hybrid courses beyond the one that is allowed by immigration regulations is a good sign. So the ruling came out. In fact, the spokeswoman for DHS confirmed this. It had been on NAFSA's website. There had been a Inside Higher Ed article about this as well, and there was a follow-up one from Inside Higher Ed this week that I'll be posting the link to, as I will with all the other stories we cover today, in the comments section on the Facebook page if you need that for further reference. Otherwise, you can go to the SMIE Consulting website, smieconsulting.org/subscribe, and the archive of all of our recent newsletters, since we started doing them over 2 years ago now, are available for you to pick up the links, direct links to these stories that we're covering. So the good news is that the extension has been granted. That is a lesson learned from the fall, that we need these things in place for continuing students, and that is extended into the spring. So we're hoping, and this is something we talked about over the last couple of weeks, is that the more institutions are evolving in the wake of COVID-19, adapting their curriculum in terms of how classes are offered, and particularly for international students, the ability to take courses from their home country and still maintain their status in F1 status in terms of the clock ticking on their OPT or CPT opportunities. That still is held in place, which is great. But the question will be, once the pandemic's over, will these kind of hybrid or exemptions where more than just one class per term can be taken online, will there be changes to the immigration regulations to reflect, frankly, the changing way higher ed is being delivered? And it will directly impact international students if there are no changes, yet there are chunks of international students' coursework that must be done for certain degrees online or in hybrid situations that would be outside of the traditional immigration regulations. So I think that's my one area, but besides the second one that we'll talk about, the second question we'll talk about today, that is my one wish in terms of moving forward. Kind of a more medium to long-term decision making needs to happen, or changes need to happen related to immigration regulations as it impacts the current one course per term limit on online or hybrid courses. So from this first story, for international students in particular, the good news is they're current students that will be in hybrid models or online models in the spring. You'll still be able to continue moving forward in that and maintain your status. So that's great whether you're in the country or outside. The second part of this question are some of the implementation issues that we saw in the early part of the fall, particularly for a lot of larger state universities in the south of the country. Were struggling with opening it fully in person. Many of them, including UNC Chapel Hill, had a week or two of classes, huge spikes in cases, and then they went fully online. They had to reverse course fairly quickly. Other campuses like the Cal State system and many schools in California had made the commitment to go fully online this fall term with varying housing arrangements for students on campus, either yes or not, some allowed, some not, on their various college campuses. That model looks set to continue into the spring for the Cal State system. But then you see other folks that we've covered in the past, Harvard, that had been online, Northeastern that had been online. We're transitioning to think about allowing students to come back to campus for hybrid courses in the springtime. So, but the two of the campuses that were kind of early endorsers of fully in-person, that actually had fairly good results from their in-person coursework decision to be in person this fall, were Purdue and Indiana, in the state of Indiana, in Indiana University and Purdue University. So both of those campuses decided, particularly Purdue, got some of the early plaudits for and probably heckling for their decision to be fully in person, with some high flex and hybrid models for courses this fall. That decision seems to have gone fairly well. Mitch Daniels received a lot of early criticism. He's the current president of Purdue University, and that in the fall there was the rationale behind their decision to be in person was, this is according to the Chronicle of Higher Ed report, denying 45,000 tuition-paying students an opportunity to study on campus for the semester would be, in Daniels' quote, a gross disservice to them and a default of our responsibility. And that's after most colleges had begun moving all their courses online in the early part of the pandemic. He was criticized for that reopening plan. That Purdue did make it through the semester uninterrupted. In fact, they didn't shift courses largely online. They weren't entirely unscathed by the virus, but did keep the infection rate relatively low with extensive testing, and that seems to be one of the keys here, protective measures in the classroom, and a barrage of messaging about personal responsibility. And that seemed to be something that was very much urged or put out after the fact when there were cases on other campuses of some significant breaches of that personal responsibility. President Daniels is certainly seeing this semester as a win, and both academically and the financial benefits of doing so. The university did not have to lay off or furlough any employees, and that's a pretty rare thing in university circles these days. And that is fairly significant. They're one of the campuses like Notre Dame that made the decision to end their fall term at Thanksgiving. President Daniels sent a message out to the university congratulating the campus for their role in helping the university make it through in the fall term without shutting down or shifting back to remote as others had done. And I think they're going to take that as a win. And that medical experts as well have given Purdue solid marks for the semester. Still risks associated with trade-offs between in-person and the health and safety in campus and the surrounding city. So that's encouraging. But they did have 3,000 cases on campus, but that case rate was not exceeding those in the state of Indiana as a whole, the rate, as we were talking about earlier. So that's success for Purdue. Obviously, anytime there are cases, there's still risks there. So we'll see how that develops in the spring term as well. And then there was a study from Indiana University of Bloomington looking at their classes taught in person in the fall, that showed that there was a counterintuitive decrease in the number of cases. Found that the risk of infection was lower for students that did more classes in person than it was for those that did one or no classes in person. So interesting, again, counterintuitive, but also a team at IU where they had significant guidance throughout the semester, testing as well, safety procedures, and that seemed to have done the trick there in terms of reducing the transmission rate, and that was lower for students that were more in-person classes than it was for those that were in zero in-person classes. So I think that shows that if you have the right precautions in place, safety procedures in place, testing in place, then you can survive this and survive it well. And it'll be interesting again to see where we go with some of these campuses, in which directions campuses go, like the Northeastern and Harvard coming more back in person, and others that were in person going more online. So there's going to be some interesting decisions made in the coming days and weeks, and in the spring as well, with the rollout of the vaccine when that hits college campuses in significant enough numbers to matter. The rollout is probably going to be a lot slower than most people expect here in the United States, well into the summer and fall before we have the herd immunity in terms of enough of us being vaccinated or already had coronavirus to have that ability to eliminate the coronavirus from our cities and towns. But then again, recent board meeting I'm a part of. Have a healthcare expert in our field who runs a university system of hospitals, and he says their planning in the hospital environment is already through November, still dealing with the impacts of COVID on their communities. So certainly not out of the woods yet by any stretch, but there's at least some light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully some important lessons learned this fall from how we can all move together on campus together to the benefit of all of our students, current and future. Now, next question. Secondly, how will recruitment be different in 2021? Well, certainly this is coming off an ICEF Monitor report, an excellent article that summarizes a lot of the what we've got to look forward to in terms of the environment for recruitment, international student recruitment. There's obviously lessons learned from since the pandemic began, when events started popping up at all times of day for fairs in all parts of the world. That those are likely to continue long into 2021, just because not all parts of the world are going to be have the vaccine immediately or in the next few months. Could be again until the end of 2021 before we see enough of that worldwide distribution to make kind of the regular international travel, as it were, happen again. So what we'll talk about in terms of what this article talks about in terms of how will recruitment be different. Certainly, I think a lot of institutions have realized, yes, their digital recruitment strategy needs to be digital first now, not digital as, yes, an important component, but it has to be digital first. And that the online fairs will continue. There's going to be some shifting momentum in terms of where student interest is going to be based on who's open. And yes, there are certainly, as a country, the U.S. has not handled the pandemic particularly well, but on campus, there are great examples of how campuses have succeeded. And if your campus is one of those, you need to be shouting that story from the rooftops right now and have your current students be part of that conversation. Because I've had this conversation with a number of institutions recently, is how important a current student strategy is jumping to the top of the list in terms of communicating your messaging. Because when you think about it, who's going to believe, who is a prospective student who's potentially wary about coming to the United States because of the PR of the pandemic, not necessarily the political situation, because we know that will be more pro-international ed in the coming months once the Biden administration takes office at the end of January. But you see the pandemic response as a country has not been good. There may be concerns about outbreaks in your state or in your region. How does that get perceived by prospective students? And when it's health and safety that is a concern, whatever you say as an institution in terms of safety protocols, testing, and X, Y, and Z, number of cases, all of that, that's good information to be giving out that you are well and truly should be doing from your end. But in terms of convincing a student, convincing a parent that it's safe to be on our campus, that's a message that comes from students who are living it now. And having your current international students be an essential part of your messaging campaign now, more than ever, in helping to share the perspective of what it's going to be like for prospective students, what it's like now on campus, the day-to-day experiences they're having, dealing with those safety protocols that are put in place, dealing with online education, how they're managing it. That's going to say more about your campus's ability to handle this pandemic than you as an admissions officer providing that same information. So it's so important that your current students be at the point of the tip of the spear in terms of your messaging to your prospective audiences at this point. There's also, in addition to the virtual fairs and potential change in destinations for students based on who's open for business and who is accepting students in. Once our consulates and embassies start ramping back up with the visa appointments, I think there's going to be a much more positive attitude towards studying in the United States than we've had. There's also, if you don't already have it, it's a time when having a CRM that is your own, that you have your own instance of your particular CRM. If you're, say, domestic admissions has their own version, and you've been kind of lobbing on theirs for the last few years, but you need your own, hopefully getting your own version of it, your own instance that allows you to do the segmentation of your messaging, that allows you to have country level messaging, but a major level messaging that responds to the needs of international students where they are and answers the questions that they have at that time. The more prepared you are to be flexible in your messaging and have that data and your systems management, that CRM that is flexible and nimble enough to allow you to do the messaging you need to in ways that make sense for international students, not just as part of a larger institutional effort. That is going to make a significant difference in your progress towards enrolling your class in the coming semesters. So there's going to be changes, and I think the urgency of some features of the International Student Recruitment Plan are rising to the top more quickly as people finally have their feet under them in terms of, okay, I need to have a strong digital strategy. I need to be doing my research and getting my current students involved. I'm going to be doing these virtual fairs, but I need to have a system that will allow me to manage the data that I have and to diversify how I recruit all the different student groups that we're looking to bring to campus. So there's going to be movement, certainly, but I think for the time being, for 2021, the virtual piece will continue. There's going to be a greater emphasis on getting real-time data on market trends. I think there's going to be a significant move to prioritize. Obviously, you're not traveling probably for the majority of 2021. Getting money reallocated to improving your systems, your CRM or other operational systems that will help you manage the data that you have and the messaging that you need to do to your prospective audiences. So that's my take. That's very much in line with what ISIF is looking at. But my emphasis here would be having your current students at the tip of your messaging and on all levels to really reflect what it's like right now at a time when there's great concern, frankly, and should be around the world about going abroad for study and whether or not it's practical and realistic and safe, frankly. So hopefully you take that on board and see if you don't already have a good, solid International Student Ambassador program, international students that are either working on your staff or volunteering to be a part of your recruitment of international students. Right now, that is absolutely essential to helping tell your institutional story. So that's it for question 2. Our final question is a bit of a dream for international educators, particularly those that are on the recruitment side, who've met with consular officers at U.S. consulates overseas who always talk about 214B, the non-immigrant intent hurdle that all international students must pass. There's an article in the Pie this past week that focuses on something that was proposed by ACE, American Council on Education, by Brad Farnsworth. He's their Vice President for Global Engagement. Brad's been in the business a good long while and at ACE for for over a decade. And he's really, I think, got his finger on something that is in a dream scenario for international educators to bring us, frankly, in line more with other countries in terms of their immigration policies. That right now in the U.S., the student visa category, F1 students, it is a non-immigrant student visa category, or non-immigrant visa category, which means that the purpose of coming to the United States is not to stay after studies are done, beyond any OPT that a student might do. The expectation is students will return home, and that is part of the crux of the challenge here for this question. Would changing F1 visa status to dual intent matter? And my clear answer to that is absolutely. I mean, it is something that any of you who've been through those meetings with consular officers, they hammer home the point on immigrant intent. Even though they say they don't expect an 18-year-old to know exactly what they're going to do for the rest of their life and have a very detailed plan on that, they do have to, based on immigration regulations, that's the law in place, that the consular officer does have to be comfortable enough with what the student is presenting to say that the student is not planning to be an immigrant to the United States. And there are a lot of ways for students to prove that negative through ties to their home country, all of that, family, property, businesses, jobs, whatever it might be, to come back to. That's all helps make a very good case for disproving immigrant intent. And that's something that moving forward, if it were ever to happen, would be one of those days where I think international admissions, international student recruitment officials would celebrate widely because that would put another strong building block and benefit to U.S. study in our favor. Because you look at Canada, you look at UK, you look at Australia, New Zealand, all of these major destinations have very clear pathways that allow students to progress through to after they're done work to work after they're done studying to work, and work can lead to permanent residency in all of those countries, because the student permit, the study permit, student visa is not a single intent non-immigrant visa category. So I think this, if it were to happen in the U.S., and the article does make clear, and Brad Farnsworth certainly says it would be a very difficult proposition for the U.S. to make that change, given everything else that's happening without comprehensive immigration reform. I think that's the only way this gets included, if that were ever to be tackled, because it is so important and long overdue in our country to have revisions to our immigration regulations and laws that govern who can come in, who cannot. It's for everything from refugees and asylees up through students, permanent residents, H-1Bs, all of that. That whole system, it's arcane. It needs a significant overhaul. And there things like the visa issue that we're talking about here, making it a dual intent visa that would allow and take out the 214B piece of the puzzle, that would allow students, when they're going for that consular appointments, to have the conversation, say, I'm thinking about maybe working and staying in the U.S., and but might be coming back here. So that flexibility should be built into the student visa category. It would take an act of Congress, based on everything I've been reading about it, to make that shift, because it changes the intent of the visas categories that exist. So it'll be something more of a wish list than an actual probability. When I put it close to what we can dream about but never really expect, would be right up there with the national international ed strategy in the United States. Probably just a little bit easier than that, but if we get comprehensive immigration reform, that would certainly be much easier to do than have a national policy on international education. So there's a lot of bright spots out there. We've got to look for them. Certainly not, it's a little harder to find them these days, but the good news is they are out there. And if we can be working together and continued advocacy with our elected officials and support for comprehensive immigration reform and addressing the issues, one of which I talked about in the first topic, is getting immigration regulations adjusted that allow for more options for international students in terms of the kinds of degree studies they can be doing here, if more than just one course is possible. And if there's a requirement that a course be done partly in person, partly online, those allowances be made. If they're part of a degree program that requires it, I think the immigration regulations should reflect that. Otherwise, international students might be excluded in future from more of these hybrid versions of degree programs. So that's it for what we have today on the Roundup. We look forward to chatting with you about this in future virtual conversations, or when we do get back together at some point in the future at conferences. Looking forward to reconnecting there. And always welcome to have consults with you on your social media policies, on your overall strategic recruitment initiatives, CRM implementation issues, messaging campaigns, all of that. That's what we do here at Social Media and International Ed Consulting. So looking forward to having those conversations with you on these topics and more. So until the next time we speak, looking forward to a wonderful week ahead for you. Cheers.